Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Arcade with Alvin, where today we're going to be making a giant prime rib roast from Monster Hunter Wilds. Now in the game, there's a scene that I really like, where you just open up your cooking menu, and you just set up a grill and take this giant rib roast, and buy the bones and happily cook it over the fire, humming the whole way, slicing it up into these beautiful thick steaks, raising it in the air like a trophy, and calling it a day. And I think that's what we're gonna do today. So we have sourced a beautiful 5-bone roast, essentially a tomahawk roast, and there's actually a little bit of dry age on it too, which I think is pretty on brand with the game. The marbling is really nice, and we are very lucky to be able to work with this beautiful cut of meat. So let's treat it with the respect it deserves by roasting it over an open flame. Let's just see how that goes. So first things first, because this is a dry aged piece of meat, even though the butcher did a very good job at cleaning up a lot of those funky bits, there's still a couple of little patches that I think would probably be better if we take those out. I like a nice balance between a dry aged flavor and still the regular flavor of the beef. I don't want it too strong, so any of these bits that look a little funky or a little dark, kind of on the gray, black, blue side, I'm gonna trim off just to be safe. I also don't like a lot of excess fat on the roast. I think some fat is nice as a fat cap, but I think every time people eat steaks or prime rib, we always kind of leave that chunk of fat on the outside on the plate anyway, so I like to cut that off beforehand and also expose some surface area for more seasoning to actually penetrate the meat rather than having it stay on the fat that gets cut off. So after doing a little bit of cleanup, we're gonna save some of these larger chunks of cleaner beef fat to use for cooking later. Now, to season this roast, I think typically people just use salt and pepper, but because this is Monster Hunter Wilds, let's use some more ingredients from the game. First, just start off with a good amount of salt, and then throw in some wild herbs and monster chili, as well as some black pepper. The wild herbs, dried parsley, I would say that's the closest to the visual we have. And monster chili, we're just using red chili pepper flakes, which maybe we got from a monster. Yeah, that works. Once the rub has been made, I'm going to apply that evenly all over the beef, trying to make sure that we coat all those nooks and crannies, because this is going to need a lot of seasoning. This is a large piece of meat, and I think the more the better. And to be fair, when it comes to making something large like a rib roast or a prime rib, because you're only seasoning the outside, I think the best way to season this is go heavier, because the crust is kind of everyone's favorite part. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take this outside and start cooking to get our meal effects going. So Rachel has built us this wonderful flame, but this is probably my favorite part. We have these wonderful fireproof gloves for safety, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pick this giant rib roast up and hold it over fire. Oh God, this is so heavy. Oh my God. This thing is like 15 pounds, which usually is not an issue if you're just lifting it normally. However, I'm holding it by the bones, and if you don't know physics, that kind of makes the strain a little bit more difficult, because then you're just kind of using your wrists and your hands. And I'm not as strong as the protagonist you play in Monster Hunter. I've not slayed that many dragons and other beasts. So there's a little bit of a strength discrepancy between what they're probably doing in the game and what I am doing now. This is also kind of an awkward position. Yeah, let's flip this over, try to get more of that fat cap in there to get a nice color on that. Man, this is real heavy. In the game, you just kind of happily hum while you rotate the beef over the fire for like 3 seconds and it's done. But this is proving more difficult than I thought, as I myself am not smoke-proof nor fireproof. And it seems like every time the beef is over the fire, the fat drips down, causing the fire to grow a little bit bigger, which is good for the beef, not as much for my hands and me. But the good thing is we are getting quite a quick sear and coloring on a lot of these good areas. So after a couple minutes of positioning, maneuvering, taking lots of breaks and shaking my hands because they're kind of tired, I've decided the best way to move forward is, instead of cooking this whole thing over the fire, which would probably require some sort of hanging rotisserie setup, which sounds pretty good, I think we should compromise by getting a nice sear on the outside and going inside and finishing it in the oven. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. However, let's just admire the little sear we got. Kind of like the color, and the smell is smelling really good. So I think we're off to a good start. Let's acknowledge our gap in Monster Hunter strength and just use conventional machinery. Okay, here's the roast after getting a good sear on as many sides as I could. And now that I'm thinking about it, the fat has already started to separate a little bit, but because one side of the rib roast is larger than the other because of the way that the rib meat works, I'm going to just trim off this wedge of fat, just because 1, I don't think people want to eat that, and 2, I think it'll actually make this cook a little bit more evenly, considering that the rib roast tapers a little bit towards one end. We're going to trim off those chunks of fat, but also save them in case we need to use that later. I have a good idea for what we can do. And then this is going to go into an oven at about 300 degrees until the internal temperature of the roast reaches about 110. I'm counting on the residual carryover heat to raise this about 10 degrees, so 110 is usually what I aim for in large roasts. So there's actually a couple of village meal scenes in Monster Hunter Wilds, which are these very delicious, huge spreads of glorious food from all sorts of areas around the world. And I think one of them could actually work really well for this. There's a scene where you have a meal with the Suja village, and they kind of take out this large meat roast, they cut it in thin slices, and it's wrapped in lettuce leaves with a nice brown sauce topped with scallions, and they also crack this onsen tamago, or some really soft cooked egg on the side. That kind of reminds me of Japanese barbecue and Korean barbecue. So let's kind of aim for that direction. I think it would be fun to make a sauce. So let's start with that brown looking sauce that they spoon over the meat. Now this sauce should definitely go well with some rich fatty meat. I'm guessing something like an onion based sauce. So I'm going to cut up a whole red onion into small pieces and then go over to the stove where I'm going to take those trimmed off beef fat trimmings from the roast earlier. After that renders down into beef fat, we're going to throw our onions in, give that a nice saute once they're nice and brown and not all the way caramelized. I'm going to eyeball some gochujang, some soy sauce, some rice vinegar, some Chinese black vinegar, and some honey. That way we have a little bit of spice to emulate the Korean barbecue style sauce. We have some soy sauce for our salt. We have vinegars for our sourness, and we have honey to balance that out. I kind of like this combination of sauce. It's something I use for pretty much everything, and it goes especially well with meat. Now, once this is all good in there and started to reduce and looking a little sticky, I'm going to take this off the heat, put that into a bowl and immersion blend this. So that way those chunks of onions can kind of turn this into a more smooth sauce like the one we see from the game. I'm sure it would be great if you didn't have to immersion blend this, and it would probably be really delicious with those chunks of onions, but I think the smoothness of a sauce, especially for a lettuce wrap, makes a little bit more sense. Okay, after a few hours, our beef has now reached 110 in the middle. Let's take this out and just look at that outside for a little bit. Something about a nice, well-browned meat roast is always going to be something that I would like to pause and appreciate. It smells wonderful in here. You've also noticed that because of the heat, some of the fat has started to separate. And usually when you have large roasts or any kind of large steak, once the meat starts to contract and the fat cap starts to crack and render down, it kind of exposes some of the inside. So I like to make sure to hit that exposed side with a little bit more seasoning rub, just to make sure that we have a lot of flavor going on here. And once this has rested for quite some time, at least an hour or so, let's go ahead and cut it open, kind of like they do in the game. You have this whole giant roast in front of you, and you take a knife and you cut a thick steak off for yourself. That was pretty satisfying. See the inside, but the center looks pretty good to me. I like my beef this way, so that's the way we're gonna do it. First, you gotta raise it like a trophy, like you do in the game. Hiya! Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we made this. Woohoo! Okay, and in true Monster Hunter style, we're gonna take a bite directly from the cap part of the steak, which is my favorite part. This is actually something I've always wanted to do, but never wanted to admit, and this is my excuse of doing so. Oh yeah. The first few bites of a ribeye steak or a prime rib are arguably the best, because one, you get all that seasoning, you get the crust, and you're probably eating from the edge of the steak, which is the cap part. And this is a delicious bite. I can see why this would give you a good buff to go into battle for quite some time, but let's be a little bit more realistic with the amount of meat that we cook today. Sure, I could probably take down one of these off camera with nothing but my hands and a lot of napkins, but there's a couple other people in the studio today, and I kind of want to make something from that Suja village feast. So, just like they do, we have some nice butter lettuce here, some pretty lettuce to wrap our meat in. We're going to go to our roast and cut off some thinner slices from it, kind of more like roast beef. This makes a little bit more sense for lettuce wrap where you actually can't use a knife and a fork to eat through. So getting a couple slices of those, let's layer that onto our lettuce wrap. Lettuce down, meat on top, some of that onion sauce in between, more meat, more sauce, and some chopped scallions just to give it a little bit of bite to it. And then, just like in the game, they kind of fold itself into a taco like that. And yeah, that is it's our version of the Monster Hunter beef lettuce wrap from the Suja village. This is a great bite. I kind of think with all this dry aged funky fatty meat, the sauce is my favorite part about this. Usually it always is. It goes really well with the meat. Isn't exactly the same as Korean barbecue, as it's quite different, but still has those fun elements. Just eating a large bite of vegetables, meat, some nice bright sauce, and some scallions to kind of make it a lot more delicious. I personally enjoy this a little bit more than taking a bite straight out of the tomahawk. That's because there's more flavors going on. Another part of the village meal scene seems to be where they crack an egg right into a bowl, and the egg is cooked, but kind of runny. In Japan, this is called an onsen tamago, or a hot spring egg, where they kind of cook these eggs in the hot volcanic waters of some parts of the country. And we don't really have access to a volcano like that, but we can make a water bath similar to that. So we're gonna follow those wonderful instructions of just one cookbook. Bring a couple of cups of water to boil, turn off the heat, add in a cup of cold water that'll bring the temperature down to a point where it emulates the same temperature of those volcanic hot springs. I'm gonna place 2 eggs in here, cover that, and let that cook for about 17 to 20 minutes. And once that's ready, I'm just gonna straight up crack these 2 eggs into the bowl, and out comes 2 onsen tamago. And just like eating sukiyaki, where you take a slice of well-marbled beef, cook it in some soy sweet broth, and dip it directly into an egg yolk or an egg for pure luxury, we're gonna do a similar thing here, where spoonfuls of our onion sauce, some slices of beef, some scallions, and we're gonna take our beef and plunge our beef around until we pop those yolks. I'm sure that sounds a little weird, but this is all for the sake of tasting good. So after that's all mixed around and the beef is well coated and everything we put into this bowl, I'm going to give this bite to our friend Nico, because he's working hard and definitely deserves a snack. Nico seems to like this very much, from the inaudible moaning noises coming from him and his mouth. I'm kind of glad we did not roll audio on this time, but it is clear that he enjoys this creation. After we have all taken part in this and agree that this is a very good way to enjoy the beef, we still have a lot of meat left to figure out what to do with. Now, obviously we could cut this up, divvy it up, and give it to everyone to take home, which would be fun. However, there's a lot of food in Monster Hunter, and I have an idea for our next video, which we can use this meat and make some more fun Monster Hunter dishes. So stay tuned for that one, because that one is also quite exciting. I'm going to go rest my hands now. That was a tiring day. Strength stats had gone up though.